Product Launch, prepared for and presented at the 2016 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
I'm going to talk about the Jobs to be Done framework. Sort of sounds like a big fancy thing, and it's tied in with something called outcome-driven innovation. Again, sounds like it's all sorts of fancy textbook stuff, but it's actually really, really very applicable to anyone that makes a product or a service. And I think that'll be probably applicable to everyone in here, hopefully. And what I also like is that it's very applicable when you're in the innovating and ideation stage, right? So you think you've got an idea, how do I crystallize that into a product? It's also really helpful to use this process when you kind of have a product, an idea for a product, and you want to begin to start to think about all the things that Dale and Dave were talking about in terms of how to look at a positioning statement, how to think about, how I'm going to position this product, how I'm going to brand this product. You could use this process to sort of make yourself kind of dive deep into kind of what drives your product being what it is. So what I'm going to do, here we go. So I'll just have a quick introduction. I'm going to talk about outcome-driven innovation. It's also called ODI, kind of tell you where it came from. Again, big name, but it's actually really, really helpful. We'll talk about what customers really want. Again, that should be sort of the genesis of any good product, is understanding what your customers want and why they want it. We're going to talk a lot about the job, and I'll explain what I mean about the job when we come a little farther into this presentation. But ultimately, your product is intended to do a job for your customer. And then lastly, I'll talk about sort of the process for the jobs to be done. The nice thing about this is that it is a process, right? So you can follow it sort of step by step, right? You don't have to have necessarily years of industry experience in a particular channel or in a particular market. If you can follow the process, it's going to kind of step you through the ways to think about this. So again, what we're talking about.
And FYI, the new PD on that previous slide is new product development.
Sorry.
Yep. Some of the jargon.
Correct. Sorry. So I mentioned outcome-driven innovation. The jobs to be done thing, that's really part of this bigger picture, which is outcome-driven innovation. And it's real simple, and I kind of sort of alluded to it earlier. So people buy products and services to get a job done. Another way to say that is people hire a product to get a job done. If you think about it that way, they are not buying a product, they're hiring something to get something done that they want. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to think about that. And so if you can link the company's value creation to customer-defined things that they want, then that's when you have a winner, is when you can link those two. So now a few little views here. The traditional way that you might think about sort of the process of gathering information for new product development, you might go to customers and ask them about solutions to a problem they have, which is not always a bad thing to do. You may ask them for specifications for something. You may get into sort of the softer stuff about talking about what are their pain points and what are their needs and things like that. Problem with that is that in all of those, you're relying on the customer to sort of understand your language, you would understand their language, and for them to sort of be able to tell you essentially what they want. And sometimes that gets very technical. So even in a company with very technical products, often people that you're talking to may not be able to describe what they really want in technical terms. But when you do the things over here, when you ask them for specifications or talk to them about needs and benefits, et cetera, you're kind of relying on the fact that they kind of understand how to express that to you. And the last one there is really important, which is it's really imprecise, right? If you ask these sort of open-ended questions that don't lead anywhere, you get really imprecise ideas about what they really want or really need. And this is good news and bad news. The good news is that if you follow these kind of processes, these numbers get better. But there's a really well-known guy in product development, Robert Cooper. If you've never read any of his books and you are involved in developing products or want to develop a product, I would get any one of a number of books that he's written. But his organization did this survey a number of years ago to look at how well we think we do when it comes to product development and how well we actually do, right? So when he asked the question, almost 3/4 of the people he asked thought they had a pretty good, well-developed process for new product development, thought they did a pretty good job of it. The reality was that less than half of those products that they were developing were successful by some metric. So there's where there's a disconnect between how we think we're doing and how we're really doing. So there's some sort of myths that come with innovation. So these 4 up here are sort of the big ones, and you'll hear people say this all the time. You know, my customer doesn't know what he wants. They can't tell me what they want, even if they thought they knew what it was. Customers have, I love this one, latent needs. They have these unknown needs, right? So there's something there that they need, and they don't even know that they need it. And then the other is, well, my customer changes his mind, you know, all the time. One time he tells me, well, this is what he wants, and 6 months later he tells me something different, right? So his needs are changing. These really are myths if you think about it from the standpoint of products doing jobs for the customer that hires them. So the first one is a fairly common one, which talks about this myth right here. Customers don't know what they want. I mean, customers really actually do know what they want. They know exactly what they want. What they want, though, is not a product. They want an outcome, right? They want the end result of what that product does. So realistically, you know, they don't want a toy. They want to entertain their kid. They don't want a bicycle. They want a way to get exercise outdoors, right? So this is the difference between customers expressing what they want versus being able to tell you they want a bicycle versus being able to express to you, I want to get exercise outdoors and be able to go with other people, et cetera. So that's kind of the first myth. The second one here is that they can't articulate their needs, right? So you ask a customer, what do you want? And if they can start to talk about it, they can't really tell you what that is. But actually, they're actually very good at telling you what they want. They just can't tell you what to make for them, right? So they can't tell you, I need you to make this for me, and here's what it's got to be like, here's the size, here's the color, et cetera. They're not going to be able to tell you that, but they'll tell you exactly what they want at the end of the day. So don't be lured into this idea that customers either don't know what they want or can't tell you what they want. They'll be very specific about that. They just can't tell you how to give them, how you can give them what they want. That's our job, actually, at the end of the day. So this next one is they have these unknown needs, right? So, and this is a great way to look at this, right? So the ultimate outcome, they know what that is, okay? That's not unknown. It's not a mystery. It's not latent. What is something that customers can't articulate very well or may not know is describing that job that they want to have done, right? So they might know that they want a bicycle, but the job really has something to do with exercise or with being able to be part of a group that cycles, so those are the jobs that they want the bicycle to help them get done. Those are the things that are often hidden, right? They don't necessarily understand those. That's part of what this process does, is help tease out, you know, what those jobs are that your product is helping the customer get done. And then requirements change over time, right? So, and I've got a slide later that kind of shows this, that the requirements definitely don't change over time. What really changes is how we get the job done. So they always have the same requirement to get exercise, for example, right? How that gets done is going to change over time. So it may have started out with, you know, an old-fashioned bicycle, and that changed into a bicycle with an electric motor on it, and so on and so forth. So how the job gets done changes, but that ultimate requirement that they had, that hasn't changed. And I'll show you a good example of how that has occurred over time in one particular example. So kind of here's where we're at. So rather than focusing on, you know, what these product attributes are, specifications, you know, lists of things that it should or should not do, we should really be focusing on these outcomes. What's the end result? What are they trying to get done with a product? So what are outcomes? So now we've talked about outcomes. We need to focus on outcomes, not on, you know, specific attributes of a particular product. So they're basically these fundamental metrics that a customer is going to use to sort of decide whether that job's getting done correctly to them or not, right? So usually it's going to be done in ways in which you want to capture that outcome. Is it getting done correctly in the sense that is it minimizing something that they do that takes more time than they like? Is it maximizing the time that they get to do something they do like, right? So you phrase it in these ways that ask them for these outcomes. Is this outcome minimizing or maximizing? Is it making something better or worse that they're trying to experience? And so that's kind of the core of sort of this jobs to get done. And now we'll kind of step into some of the specifics. But just sort of summarize that, the idea is that customers do know what they want. They can tell you what they want. They can't tell you how to solve that problem for you. They can't tell you what those jobs are necessarily that they're trying to get done, but they know at the end of the day what they want out of this. And so that's part of what the next session here, or the next section is going to talk about. How do we start teasing those jobs and outcomes out? So here's we go. This is the simplest I can make. So outcome-driven innovation is what customers want. And there's a great book, Outcome-Driven Innovation. I don't know if any of you have heard of a guy named Clayton Christensen. He's a Harvard Business School professor. He's been writing about innovation for a long time, wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, The Innovator's Solution, all these innovation things. He's kind of the father of this outcome-driven innovation and jobs to be done type idea. And it was perfected later on by a guy named Tony Ulwick. He was at IBM. And he actually wrote a book. It's a great book, and I would suggest anyone read it, called What Customers Want. That's what the name of the book is. And it's by a guy named Tony Ulwick. And he kind of took all that stuff that Clayton Christensen did around innovation and all that kind of stuff, and he distilled it down into what I'm going to show you, which is sort of this process that you can step through to figure out what these jobs are that customers are trying to do. So I'm going to do some examples. These are kind of fun to look at, and some you may have seen, some you may have not seen before, and I'm going to sort of ask a few questions here. So what do you think a customer really wants in this case, right? When a customer buys a drill.
They want the whole drill.
Yeah, right? I mean, this is the classic one, right? Another Harvard professor, I can't remember his name, sort of made this class, customers don't want a drill, they want a 1/4 inch hole, right? I mean, so that's sort of the most basic example of customers really aren't buying a drill, they're buying a hole. They want a hole. That's really what they want at the end of the day. So here's some other examples, right? So that's a camera. What do you think this represents over here? So if the normal thinking is people buy a camera, what's the way of thinking about what's the job the camera is going to, one job the camera might do? Well, now see, take photos is a little bit too broad. What might this one be really more specific, a specific job? Right, memories. Capture family memories, right? So yes, taking photos is a job that a camera does, but that's a bit too broad, right? A camera can do many jobs. One of them, in this case, is capturing family memories, for example.
Which would also be why you don't necessarily need a camera to do that anymore. So knowing what the customer wants in the end versus how you're solving that problem.
Exactly, and I will show you an exact example of what you just said. So here, MP3 player, are they buying that or what's this? What are they buying? What's that? Oh. So think out there even farther, right? Not just music. What does she look? She looks happy, right? Yeah, right. So think about it that way, right? So they're not buying an MP3 player, and they're not even just buying something to store music, though that is one of the jobs. But they're buying musical enjoyment, right? She's enjoying what she's listening to, right? So again, another way to think about this beyond just sort of the nuts and bolts of what does that thing do. We're not talking about what it does, it stores music. We're talking about jobs that it does for the person that buys it. So here's another one. So there's a hose. What does that represent? Yeah, right? A beautiful yard. Not just watering your lawn, not just a yard, a beautiful yard, right? So people are buying hoses and yard implements and all sorts of stuff, not just to have a yard. I mean, you're buying that stuff because you want You want the best yard in the block, right? You want a beautiful yard. So again, this is ways to start thinking about the jobs that a customer is trying to get done with the products that they're buying. So again, just to rehash this, right? So they're buying a whole. That's really what they want. They're buying memories that are saved. They're buying the ability to enjoy their music. They're buying a healthy garden or a beautiful lawn, right? Those are the jobs that need to get done with these products. And keep in mind, like I mentioned before, there's not just one job, right? A camera does not have one job. So when you go through this process, you will identify multiple jobs and then the outcomes of them. And then there's a way in which you can figure out which ones are the most important. And I'll kind of show you that. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Will you be talking down the line about a way of reverse engineering this? You know what I mean? If you already have the product, like, in a sense, you're finding out what the problem is, what job you want to be
Right.
doing, and then you create the product based on that job. Do you have a process for reverse engineering that when you already have the product?
Well, so it's not necessarily reverse engineering, but what I would say is that in order to do some of the things that Dale talked about and that Dave talked about in terms of how to position your product, right, and how to create sort of that brand identity, what I would suggest is that you take this process with a product you already have, okay, and go through it to see what you get out of it, right? So what you may say is if you have widget A and you've already kind of got it designed and you think that this is a product you want to go for, think about, okay, what's the job that this product's going to be hired for by a customer? And you're going to list those out, okay? And what are the outcomes from those jobs? I mean, what are the things, and as you go through that process, what it'll do is partly it'll validate what you've done, but also it will identify all those things that you should be using when you talk to your customers, right? So you've got a product, you think through this process, now you've got all the sort of the great ideas on how you're going to talk to your customers about this, how you're going to think about how you brand your product, et cetera. So you can use it in reverse. Yes, it is intended to help you initially identify opportunities for new products, but I would say you can go backwards with it, just like I described.
You know, once again, too, just to remind everyone of where we are in the process. I mean, Jerry's worked at some small companies before, and those were small companies that were still multi-billion-dollar outfits. So keep it in perspective to what you're doing and where you are in the process. The important takeaway isn't that you replicate the process as Hussmann or another like and similarly sized company does it, but more importantly that you have a process, you're aware of the process, that you know if you skip a step, you're cognizant of what you're doing, and the step that you're skipping is known to you.
Sure. And I would say also that this process does not require to do what I just described, what I just went through. This requires, a few customers that you trust, and an hour or two of their time, right? And you kind of work through this and you start to validate some of these things. So, yes.
A really good takeaway there, and I think the point that Jerry just made is, once again, action is still possible. This doesn't become an end or a means unto itself that prohibits you from taking action. You can get this online going and take the benefit of that learning back with you in relatively short order. So this should not become some kind of side project or tangent that keeps you from launching and from selling.
Right.
Exactly. We even when we were pretty nascent in the marine industry, we brought together, like you said, groups of trusted customers. We tried to get some geographical representation, tried to mix it up, and it would to the outside world sound like a complaint session. But what they were doing was talking about what you were.
Right.
What are the pain points?
Yeah.
What are they trying to fix? What are they trying to achieve? What are they missing in their retail environment that would help them? And if you just took notes and
and that's
followed up, I mean, it's...
Yeah, that's what I said at the very beginning, which is that, sometimes you get in large organizations and, us highfalutin product marketer types, will complain about how our customers don't know what they want. They're impossible. They don't know. They really do know what they want. And like Dave said, if you can sit through some of those sessions, and sometimes they're painful, you'll find out they do know what they want. They just don't know how to describe it to you in a way that you think you want it, which is tell me what the specifications are and I'll build that, right? That just doesn't going to happen properly. So here's a great one, and this goes to what you were saying earlier about people don't buy drills anymore, right? There's other ways to do things without using a drill. So what's the job here, do you think?
Read or entertain.
So entertainment, let's just say entertainment, right? So so we've got a guy, he's actually got a book. It's like a book, a real book. It's got paper. It's got like paper and it's like thick. So this guy's reading a book. She's on a smartphone. She's on a Kindle or something. She's on an actual laptop. So they're all they're all entertaining themselves somehow. So this goes to what we were talking about earlier, which is that when you look at how people truly use your product and what for, you protect yourself from competition. That's a classic Clayton Christensen type of thing, and it's actually a quote from him. So to the thing we were just looking at, and I was talking earlier about how, pardon me, do products change or do requirements change or not over time? I would say the requirement here, or the job, is to, let's say it's to capture your favorite music or to listen to your favorite music. That job hasn't changed since, Edison made his first record, right? The job is the same. How do I capture and listen to my favorite music when I want to listen to it? So we had the old Edison albums, and we had regular LPs, cassettes. Then we had CDs. Then we had digital audio players. And it doesn't end, right? Now we have Spotify and Pandora and any of the other online services. It's the same job. It's the same job. It is collecting the music I want to listen to in a place I can listen to it when I want to listen to it. Same job. Over 100 and some odd years, the job hasn't changed. It's just how we get it done. That's what's changed. Yep.
So what drove the innovation in that instance?
Along the way there?
Music, yeah.
So there's probably a million things that actually drove it, but I would venture to say that part of it was, again, customer driven, right? So if you think about the outcomes that a customer expects for that job, right? So the job is store my favorite music so I can listen to it anytime I want. And some of the outcomes might be to have my entire music collection with me. Okay, so you can't have that. Now this would have evolved over time, but as customers started to say, you know what, one of the outcomes is I want to be able to have more than one song, in my possession that I can listen to whenever I want. And with a record, it's really hard, right? I can't carry around 50 records. So then it slowly transitioned. Well, I can carry around 10 CDs. That's pretty easy. I can do that. It's better than trying to carry around 10 LPs, 10 cassettes, so on and so forth. So things like that probably drove that innovation. And again, it was understanding what the job is and then understanding what the customer outcomes, their expectations were, right? So one outcome was to maximize the number of songs that I can take with me and listen to anytime I want. That would be one desired outcome. So that's going to drive people to find out, people like us that make products, how do I do that? If the customer wants to take their music with them and they want to now maximize that number, how do I get them, how can I get it so they can take more music with them, right?
It's interesting because you would wonder, I wonder how long a customer would have been satisfied with the tape cassette without the product guy flashing new stuff.
Yeah, and make no mistake, companies like Apple and others certainly are going to be out ahead slightly of that curve, right? Now, Apple would like you to believe that they inform the rest of us what's cool and what's good and where technology is, right? And they would like us to believe that. But honestly, all they're doing is tapping into those early adopters, right? There's still customers out there that are at the bleeding edge, that they're plugged into, and they're understanding what those desired outcomes for those bleeding edge early adopters are. So it's no different. They're only a little bit ahead of the rest of us, but it's still not Apple sort of magically plucking brilliant ideas out of the air, right? So it's still coming from customers. It's just a much smaller, very focused set of customers. So here's another way to think about it. Let's go back to a drill, really simple idea, right? If you think about normal product development, you think about what a drill does, right? It drills holes, it tightens and loosens things, it can spin things in the chuck. That's how, when you think about what a drill does. But think about what the drill is used for. This is where it gets to be huge, right? Drill is used for all sorts of stuff, including things that the drill manufacturer never even possibly imagined it'd be used for. Hanging pictures, putting toys together, I mean, it just goes on and on. This is the difference between a product focus. These are specifications. These are requirements. It's got to have it's got to be able to take 1/4-inch bits, and it's got to be able to do this. Those are specifications, and those are important when it's time to actually start manufacturing a product. But you need to think about the jobs. What's this thing, and what is it supposed to be getting done for the customer? And the reason is because, like we just mentioned earlier, what's the competition for a drill? Is it just another drill? Or is it a screwdriver? Is a screwdriver a competitor for a drill? It is, technically, right? It does the same stuff. A drill may do it better. So this is where you're looking at these outcomes, right? I mean, comparing a screwdriver to a drill, same job, but the desired outcome from the customer is going to be different. The customer may say, I need to maximize the number of screws that I can put in a certain amount of time. Well, that desired outcome, that's going to make this one less desirable and this more desirable, right? But they do the same job. Right. For this purposes of this demonstration, it's a plain old. So a hammer, right? I've seen people use drills the way you could use a hammer, right? So if you use a drill to hang a picture, you could use a hammer to hang a picture as well. The reason we go through this is to know what your competition is. Your competition as a drill manufacturer is not just other drill manufacturers. It could be screwdriver manufacturers, it could be hammer manufacturers, and nowadays it could be these things, right? Those releasable hooks, that you can get, that you can hang on the wall and you just pull the tab and it pops off again, right? I mean, that's a competitor for a drill if you use a drill, if the job is to hang a picture, for example. Yeah.
Are you going to talk about other drills, though, as well? Because what differentiates all the different drills?
Well, what differentiates the drills, though, if you go down that, this is all that's going to differentiate one drill from another, right? A $500 drill is not going to hang a picture any better than a $20 drill, right? So if you start comparing, and you don't get me wrong, you do have to understand who your direct competitors are, right? Because you will have customers that will be looking at your drill versus somebody else's drill, right? So you do have to do that. But in the big picture, if you get caught just trying to make sure that your drill is better than this guy's drill over here, you're going to miss something in here, right? So I guess what I'm saying is you start here thinking about the jobs and then make sure that your drill does those jobs better than anybody else's drill.
Does that take into account intangible appeal of products? Just because I'm a gear guy, right? If you look at every car does the same job,
Right.
1994 Ford Explorer does the same thing as the Z06 Corvette. Actually holds more people, right? But one is much more desirable,
Right.
right? And that's all to do with intangibility. Does
Right.
that factor into this? Right? Because
It does, and here's how it does, right? So if you pick any one of those jobs I had on the other slide, intangibles like, again, if you're into the aesthetics or the design, et cetera, of something, say like an Apple customer, right? For example, where that comes into it is the outcome of the job, right? So if the outcome is I want to maximize how cool I look doing this. And you may not say it that way, but that's what you mean, right? Is like when I pull out this iPhone, I want people to notice that I've got the latest, greatest iPhone or whatever. That's a desired outcome. And you can capture that in here. And I'll show you later as a part of this process, some of these desired outcomes are what you would call more intangible ones, social outcomes. That's a social outcome, right? Something like that. So this is where it gets kind of like, there's some charts and stuff, but I'll make this simple. So here's where we're just talking about the main job, and these are these key jobs that we talked about on the other screens, right? So this would be like, again, if the functional job, this job might be, to hang a picture, and these are other functional jobs related to hanging a picture. These emotional jobs, these are the ones we just talked about, which is like, I want to look cool while I'm doing that kind of stuff, or I want to I want to be perceived as a early adopter in what I'm doing. So I want this thing to sort of convey that. These are those sort of emotional jobs that the product's doing for you. I'm not going to go through all this, in detail, but basically what you're doing is you're identifying these jobs, and there's multiple jobs for a product, and then for each of those jobs, there's a process that you have to do that, and I'll show you. So for a particular job, you're going to do A, B, C, and D to get that job done. And for each of those A, B, C, and Ds, there's a desired outcome that that customer has, right? I want to do that faster. I want to do it easier. I want this to be simpler. Those are desired outcomes to get those steps done, and I'll kind of show you how that looks. And this is what we call a job map. What I just described is what we call a job map. And I've done these before with customers where you identify that job, you identify the steps to get that job done, you validate that with the customer. So you sit with the customer and say, hey, when you're trying to get this done, are these the things you go through to get that done? And they say, yeah, that looks pretty good. And then you start going down into, okay, for each one of those, what doesn't work the way you'd like it to, right? So, and I'll show you a direct example. I think it's on the next slide, hopefully. Nope, the same thing. So again, customers, the big thing here to remember is customers, whether they say it or not, they use these metrics in their head to decide whether this thing is doing the job well enough for them, right? They don't necessarily know what those are. They're not going to spell it out for you. But when they start using your product to get a job done, they're going to know whether it's doing it the way that they expect it to be done. And we call those needs. I hate using that term, but it's ultimately what the customer needs. So here's kind of the process, right? So you build that job activity process, right? So you think about the jobs that your product is supposed to be getting done. Think about the steps for those jobs, right? And then here, this is when you have to sit with your customer, right? And this is when you're saying, okay, here's the steps to these jobs to get them done. You need to have, and I'll show you some ways to get some precise feedback from them on what those outcomes are that they expect. Do they expect something to be done faster? Do they expect something to be minimized? Do they expect something else to be maximized? You step them through that so they can give you a very specific answer, because I mentioned earlier on, when you do traditional voice of the customer or just ask a customer what they want, it's usually really imprecise, right? I mean, they're going to give you these fuzzy answers that then you're left later trying to figure out, well, exactly what did they mean? And does that mean they want this or this? There'll be 3 different ways to get at the same result. So these are ways to help you, and I'll show you some, to drill down to those specifics. Then, this is really important here, you take all these things, so you've got these outcomes, and then you got to figure out how important are they, right? They're not all going to have the same importance to their customer, right? Some customers are going to say, these are all the things I want to get done. Here's what I consider to be the important outcomes for all these, but they're not all ranked the same. Some are going to be like, this one's really important, this one's not so important. So there's a way in which you can do that. And again, the whole purpose of this is to take a process which is normally really, really fuzzy and, varies from one person asking a question to another person asking the same question. Try to make it so that it's structured so that anyone can do it and you can kind of get the same consistent results every time. So then the last part you're really going to do, and this is kind of like what you do just before you would actually start a product development process, is you take that ranked things and you plot it, and I'll show you how you do that. And again, this is not as difficult as it sounds. It's very simple. You kind of lay it out visually so you can see where these opportunities are, right? What you'll see is when you lay all these out, when you look at what the customer's trying to do, what they value as being important or not important, and then how well those things are being done for them now, when you lay it all out, what you'll see groupings of things that the customer is looking for that aren't getting done. That's where your opportunities are, right? You start to see, my customer values these 5 things, and when I ask them how well those jobs or those outcomes are being accomplished for them, they're really low scores. So that's where your opportunity is, right? They want that stuff, and they're not getting it. That's ultimately what you're trying to find. Trying to find those places, I didn't say at the beginning, but it's a difference between trying to find a customer for your product, okay, versus the other way around, which is customers that want your product, right? So there's two different ways to look at this. And what you want to avoid, and it happens to lots of organizations, is you got a great product and you start looking around for the customer for it, right? You want to try to do it the other way around. You want to try to have it so that you already know what your customer wants and you know how to talk to them about what they want. So this is where it kind of starts to hopefully make more sense. So a circular saw has lots of different jobs it can do. Let's just use one. Make a straight cut. I want to make a straight cut. That's one job it does. So to do that one job, make a straight cut, we kind of mapped out, well, what are the basic steps to make a straight cut? Well, you plan the cut, right? Measure it and maybe draw it out, make sure it's all planned. Make sure the saw is adjusted, adjust the saw. You start the cut, and then you operate the saw until you finish the cut, right? So, and there may be different ways to describe this, but for this example, this is the job, and this is how we describe the steps. So let's just look at this one step right here. Adjust the saw. So outcomes. So the outcomes are, what does a customer, what do they expect when it comes to adjusting the saw? And how are they going to measure whether it's being done well or not? So this is where you're going to spend time with your customer. Your customer is going to give you some of this feedback, right? So when it comes to adjusting the saw, you want to minimize the time it takes to change the blade. So let's say you have to change the blade. You want to minimize the time it takes to do that. You want to increase the accuracy of, the saw calibrations, what angle it's at and how deep the cut it's going to make and all that kind of stuff. You want to minimize the movement of the handle, right? So you want to make it so that when you have to set it to different depths and stuff, you don't have to mess with the saw a lot. It's very simple. Maybe you don't even have to take your hand off the handle to do all that. Maybe you just do it with your thumb or something. You want to minimize the time it takes for that blade to cut to that depth, right? So you don't want to take a long time to get to that depth and start cutting. Or also, you want to minimize the time it takes to cut at a certain angle. So this is just to give you an idea, for one job for a product, you drill down into what these things are, these process steps, the steps they're doing to get that job done. And you talk to your customer about, okay, when it comes to adjusting the saw, with what you're currently using to get the job done, what do you have problems with? And they may say, it takes me forever to change the blade. It's like, it takes 10 minutes to change the blade. I hate that. Well, what we do is we translate that into minimize the time it takes to change the blade, right? So you're taking that sort of imprecise language from the customer about hating how long it takes to change his blade into something that we can actually do when we're developing a product. And we say, okay, we're going to design this thing so it takes the least amount of time possible that we can do to change that blade. So this is how you would step through. This is just one small sort of little slice of how you might look at one job for this product. And you may or may not do all of these, right? So you may, when you go through this and you talk to your customer, you may find that there's very little here that they have desired outcomes that are not met. So you might just find that one like this, has a deep set of outcomes that they're expecting. But you don't know that really until you start talking to your customers. And I mentioned it earlier, but it's really important to phrase these things so that they make sense to you and they're not that fuzzy language that customers often use, right? So you want to talk about directions like maximize or minimize. You want to use specific units of measure, right? So if a customer says, I need to do this 5 minutes less than it currently takes me to do now, right? So you want to use that kind of information in there. Or an outcome that's desired, right? So I want to avoid having to do something, or I want to be able to be sure that I do something as part of this process. So an example phrase would be minimize the amount of time needed to configure this software as an example. And we talked about it on the previous page. Minimize the amount of time it takes to change a saw blade. These are ideas, ways of taking customer descriptions of what they expect to happen into something you can actually do when you're developing your product. So there's lots of ways to create these rating scales. I would suggest, like you say, go to the Stratogen and I can give you guys this information at the end. Go to their website. They've got lots of great tools and templates already set up on how to do this to make it really easy. But the important point I want to make here is that for every outcome, so minimize the time it takes to change a blade. That was one of the desired outcomes our customer said they wanted to have, right? What you need to get from the customer once they express that to you is how important is that? So in all the things that they're doing, how important is that outcome to minimize the time it takes to change the blade? And you can use any kind of scale you want, 0 to 5, 1 to 10. This is like a 1 to 10 scale here. So you want, how important is it to do that? And then this is just as important, which is, okay, well, how well does that get done now with whatever you're using, right? So they're probably using something now to cut wood or whatever that, if we're talking about a circular saw example. So how well does your current solution get that done? So in this case, it's sort of important, but it's already getting done pretty well by whatever they're using. So the opportunity here is a 2. Now the way I'm doing this is just, it's the importance times 2 minus the satisfaction. Because you'll see it works out pretty well. Here, how accurate the blade cuts, that's super important, and they're not getting it from their current solution. Really low score here, but it's super important. Really high score. Here's one that's kind of in the middle somewhere. It's like, it's sort of important, it's not really getting done well. It gets this score using that calculation. But you can see it works out well because this is just the way you would expect it to come out. This is super important, and it's not getting done, and it's got the highest score. This one is kind of in the middle, but it's also not getting done too well. It gets the second highest. This one here, it's almost as important as this one, but it's already getting done really well, right? So this lays it out so that, and this is what I said earlier on, this is the way in which you can do all this and kind of make it so it's structured, and you can kind of actually make a process out of this so that you can figure all this stuff out without having to ask a lot of open-ended questions and kind of figure out what did he mean by that and how important is that. You ask it this way, you score it this way, and what you end up with is this. What this will really look like, I'm going to do my one drawing for the day. What this will really look like is you will have stuff all over the place in here, right? These are those, on the previous page, these are all those desired outcomes, these are their scores, right? Importance and satisfaction, right? So these are going to get plotted all over here. What you end up with is looking at things that are really important and are really, really low satisfaction. This is the space you want to go after right here, right? These are important and no one's getting it done for them. This in here, these are, they call it appropriately served. This is kind of like where you've got a lot of people that are doing it fairly well, and it's going to be kind of a dogfight, right? I mean, you can get in there and you can spend time there, but it's going to be a tough slog. And then over here, I like this one. So this is overserved, right? So this is where it's not terribly important. Satisfaction is, it's okay because it's not very important, but you have opportunities here to either, if you want to go after a cost play, you can do that here. Or this is the really interesting one. This is disruption, right? So this is where their satisfaction seems to be okay. It's not terribly important. So that's where you find ways to sort of disrupt that market. And I'm not going to go into that here, but this is the area that's kind of like no man's land. If you're stuck in here, that's kind of rough. That's a dogfight. These are the ones to go after for sure. And ideally, when you do this with your customer, you're going to have stuff kind of scattered through here. And so you're going to have opportunities up here to go after. And this is what you want to focus on. And these are just a few acknowledgements. So again, Stratogen, I would go to their website. That's that Tony Ulwick guy from IBM. Clayton Christensen, any of the Innovators fill in the blank books are great ones to read. What Customers Want, I would highly recommend that one. That's an easy read. And the nice thing about this one is that Clayton Christensen is a professor. So, his books are a bit scholarly, which is okay. Tony Ulwick is a practitioner, right? So he was a product management guy at IBM for many years. So his book is really readable, and it's filled with like kind of real world uses. And then this is a great one. Anyone in B2B products, right? So if you're doing B2B type products, what Dan Adams did is he took this whole jobs to be done idea and slightly modified it to be more appropriate for business to business activities. And I won't go into the differences there, but New Product Blueprinting is his book. And I'm at Panasonic, or a division of Panasonic called Hussmann. And we use New Product Blueprinting at Hussmann, right? So it's a large company, but we use that as a part of our process to identify new opportunities. So it does work. And that's it. That's my contact info. Questions? I know we asked some questions along the way, but I don't know if anyone has any other questions.
We got 5 minutes and small change built in for questions.
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
If anyone has any.
Good sister, bad sister? So I'll throw this out there if anybody, while we're waiting for a couple of questions, but here's the thing. So we've seen a couple of different examples. I think they've reinforced what we've been learning, and they've done so from opposite ends of the extremes. We've seen what it looks like at a small company where you're wearing all of the hats or many of the hats, and where you're not cutting corners, but you don't have the resources to go as deep, and at the same time you're trying to balance that between efficiently using your time and the resources, the other resources that you do have. And then we've seen what you can do when you are as resourced as a Hussmann. So a couple of things. Hussmann's not cutting corners. They've not developed this in a day. There aren't two guys sitting down at Hussmann going, I can hardly wait till the day when we get paid for doing this. It's an entire wing of the building that has been doing this for generations. They've been able to bring in some of the best minds in industry thinking and product management, as well as in academic thinking. The point is that what they've developed is exceedingly complex, but it's exceedingly complex, and it wasn't developed in a day, and it wasn't developed for free. There are versions of this that, as long as you set your company and your product up with that end in mind, and you understand that you and you alone are the one that's empowered to manage to margin, manage to the profitability of the business, you'll get there where you've got a more complex process as you grow. The important thing now is that you have a process and that it's grounded in some kind of reality or some kind of best practices thinking. So when you go home tonight and we talk tomorrow, I want somebody to come back tomorrow and say, well, I pushed the launch off for 50 years because I'm going to go recreate the Hussmann system. No, you're not. You're going to grow into it, launch, and you're going to do so profitably. You're going to understand that there's still steps that you would benefit from along the way.
And I would say if there's anything you took away, just it's the mindset of thinking about your product as being hired to do a job, right? It's to do a job. It's not a collection of specifications, a collection of features or colors. It is something that your customer wants because it's helping them get something done. Yes, sir.
So, I know a couple of your examples, per mark, or in kind of large customer base environment, right? And you sort of get an idea of where the market is. But, a lot of people here are smaller, and so you're going to get, you ask 10 salesmen and you get 20 answers.
Right.
About where the customer's pain points are.
Right.
Is there a way to scale down like that Pareto process to find out, right? Because if you ask somebody if you get a limited sample size, you ask somebody on a bad day, not only do you get a description of the problem, you get a description of several other problems that may or may not actually exist.
Right.
Right? How when you're a small sized company, do you filter out to get to, hey, there are some legitimate open white spaces in this market
Right.
to go hit
Right.
versus
Right. I think the only way probably you do that, and it's a valid way to approach this process, which is that, again, getting good at not asking customers about problems or solutions, but really focusing on taking out all of the emotion from it, just asking them to talk about the jobs that they're trying to do. Not good or bad, right? Don't ask them to explain whether, well, this job, I shouldn't have to even do this job because it's that. the key with when you have a small group that you're trying to get information from is to not get drawn into what you described, which is it becomes a description of, well, you know, this is what sucks for me when I'm doing this, and you go to talk to someone else, and well, this is what I love, and this, so if you have to, it's a part of it, it's a discipline really to get good at just talking about the jobs they're trying to do, not asking them to weigh in on the pros and cons of that job, right? Because the job that they have to do, you know, if they're honest and they've thought about it, that shouldn't change regardless of who you talk to, right? I mean, the job is the job. Now, where there might be some differences is when you start looking at outcomes, right? Now, hopefully, if they got the job right and everyone agrees on the job, the outcomes sort of fall in place behind that, right? So the key when you don't have for large or small organizations is to enforce that discipline, to not get drawn into a complain fest, right? Where they start listing all the things that they don't like or the few things that they do like. And if you get drawn into that, then you're right. You will get 10 different answers from 10 different participants. So, yes?
So, I spent 20 years in corporate America, half of that in marketing, the other half in technology and manufacturing. And we always talk about market pull versus product push. And so how do you reconcile like the people, folks in here who have an idea or ultimately of the product?
Right.
I mean, the most successful project I've ever been on is when it was a market pull.
Right.
Once they were product push,
Right. So,
back, they just didn't. They
So,
didn't go anywhere, or we
you're right.
pivot into somewhere where we found that the market needed it versus where we started.
right. So I think maybe you maybe answered the question there in the last part, which is that first, absolutely. If you know what your customers are trying to get done and you solve that, that is always going to be the best. That's always going to be the best way to go. In this case, let's say you've got a product or idea, you've kind of gone down that path. You've done some of this checking, at least gut checking, that there's some interest or market out there. Two things you can do with this. One is, like we were talking about, you use this to refine your message to understand better what it is your product really is delivering to customers in terms of the job it's trying to solve, right? So part of it is maybe refining that message better, because often products fail partly because they're not properly messaged to their customer, right? I've seen examples of many great products that just fell flat because the people with that product didn't understand how to talk to their customer about what it was really doing, right? They got pulled back into describing, well, it's 5% faster than so-and-so's and it does this and that, instead of understanding, actually, my product solves this problem and does this job. And maybe what you do is what you described, which is you end up pivoting somewhere, right? I mean, unless your product's done and you've capitalized equipment and all that kind of stuff, you might have an opportunity to learn from this and pivot, right? It's never too late to do that until you're actually selling product in the store, and sometimes then it's even not too late. So,
Okay, so it's 8:30. After this, you're done your time. I want to thank Jerry again. I also have two announcements.